In July this year, the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India released a consultation paper that explored regulation of communication platforms like WhatsApp and Telegram. One of the questions laid out by the consultation was whether there is a need for a licensing framework for communication platforms. And if so, what specific requirements these platforms should meet under said licensing framework. Based on the responses to this consultation, we understand that telecom companies want platforms to meet the same requirements that they currently do, which include maintaining quality of service, provision of emergency services, and so on. We are joined by Nikhil Pava, the founder of MediaNama and a champion of net neutrality, to discuss this topic. So, hi Nikhil. The first thing I would like to understand is it fair for OTT platforms to be held by the same licensing standards that telecom companies currently meet?
Thanks, Kamya. So, look, online services, and I won't call them OTT services because that's what telecom operators do. This is the internet we're talking about, right? So, these are online services, and they have they're delivered from across the globe. They're not over the top when it comes to telecom. Now, why do we have a licensing framework for let's say regular telecom communications? What you have there essentially is that telecom operators are using a scarce resource called spectrum, and there needs to be optimal utilization of that spectrum. So they are required to uh, take part in an auction to buy spectrum, and they provide internet access services because they have that spectrum, right? And same thing happens in so wireline. There is no auction. There is people can put wires to get internet to your homes, but spectrum is a scarce resource. When you look at the other aspect about, let's say, messaging and calling, and that's under a universal license, the way that works is that there are restricted resources that the government has called numbering resources. So it's because these numbering resources are limited in nature that they are licensed out. And then on top of that, along with that, the government has uh, requirements regarding quality of service, regarding interception, etc. And that's because they control that through numbering resources. Now, online services are from across the globe. They don't necessarily have to buy a license to operate in India right now. And so we have this ability to have global communication, and they are available on the internet. So if you're looking at communications, one, there's already a framework for licensing for telecom operators, and online services are not utilizing that spectrum. It's actually users are utilizing that spectrum to access these online services. So I don't understand why an online service would have to buy a license. What is it that they are getting in return? So, if there's an auction and telecom operators a spectrum, they're getting spectrum in return for that exclusivity, and they're paying a fee for that. Same way, limited licensing resources, they're getting exclusivity over that. There is no exclusivity on the internet. There's no benefit that a service gets through this licensing framework. The other is that the internet is sort of based on a protocol called TCP/IP. In the same way, there are messaging protocols like XMPP, XMPP, so which allows anyone to set up a messaging app and they can communicate with each other. So if you bring it under a licensing framework, every app won't buy a license. So what will you do? You'll ban everything else and make it the exclusive preserve of a few players like WhatsApp, maybe, who might be willing to go and buy a license. We don't know. But effectively, it will kill all innovation in messaging and make it similar to what you have in telecom. If you look at it historically, um, online messaging is much richer as compared to offline. So, for example, you can do emojis in online. You can't do it offline. You can send GIFs in online. You can't do that in offline. You can do video calls without a separate, video call framework, etc., going through a telecom network. So you can do shopping in online messaging apps. So what's a messaging app again is another point for debate. So uh, Paytm, which is a payments app, also has messaging. So is it a license? Should it be licensed as a messaging app as well? When is it that an app transitions from being a messaging app to an e-commerce app or a payments app, right? Or transition from being a payments app to a messaging app. Everything on the internet is messaging. Another example, for example, is email. All email is a form of messaging. So, are you saying now that there will be a licensing framework for email? How ridiculous is that in 2023? So, this call for licensing is flawed by design, and it comes from a lack of understanding of how the internet operates. Um, and I think there shouldn't be a licensing framework for the internet. That's very, very clear.
One of the most important aspects that is being discussed in all the telecom companies' responses was lawful interception. So currently, telecom companies allow the government to intercept messages and calls. Should the same be required out of communication platforms? And if so, how would it even be possible for communication platforms that have encryption?
So the challenge in these platforms is end-to-end encryption. So what the Indian government has with a centralized monitoring system, even regular telecom networks, is that they have the ability to intercept messages and calls and get location information on individual users without even the telecom operator knowing. And that what it does is it creates a situation where there is mass surveillance taking place. Like I think based on an answer in Parliament or to an RTI, I remember it was said that it was calculated that there are almost 300 orders for interception that are being signed every day. So the mass surveillance regime that is there that needs to be checked. Telecom operators have no choice but to provide that mass surveillance regime. It's one of the reasons why so much of communications actually shifted to online messaging because it's a private form of communication. If let's say I send you my health report, I don't necessarily want a third party snooping in and reading what my health report contains. If let's say uh, person A proposes to person B, then that's a matter that's private between them, and in the same manner in a democracy, uh, political communication should be private. What a party discusses internally with its members shouldn't be open for surveillance by the government. And so private communications is important, and we need to respect the sanctity of private communications, and there needs to be oversight. End-to-end encryption is a mechanism for privacy which ensures that even the platform that's providing that messaging service cannot read it. So WhatsApp, for example, has end-to-end messaging, and I think it's great that WhatsApp can't read our messages, right? You don't want Facebook to be reading more of our messages. So what does the government want? If there is a backdoor that's installed, what it means is that anyone will be able to potentially exploit it. There is no A backdoor is a vulnerability in a messaging system, in an encrypted system. There is no way on earth that a vulnerability that is available to be exploited by the government will not be exploited by a third party. So this and one of the things that I say a lot in the context of this issue is you can't make people uh, of this country more secure if there's a national security argument here by making them more vulnerable. You basically end up impacting the security of this country because everyone becomes vulnerable the moment you introduce these backdoors or these vulnerabilities in an encrypted system. So honestly, uh, I think you know we need to look at other mechanisms for enabling uh, interception, etc., for national security purposes. Legal mechanisms, not Pegasus like illegal methods for infiltrating using a malware or a spyware into someone's phone and then reading all of their messages. And there needs to be oversight of our national security agencies, because currently there is no parliamentary oversight there. And so everything is kosher as far as they're concerned. And I think that's more of a cause for concern. Even in the data protection bill, we didn't get surveillance reform. So before you expand the ability and the scope of a surveillance ecosystem, first learn to rein them in.
Right. Coming back to something you mentioned in response to my first question, talked about quality of service. So, for an OTT platform, who is not really in control, or on a communication platform, it's not really in control of the underlying infrastructure, how would it be possible for them to ensure that they are maintaining a quality of service?
So, the question answers itself here, because the fact is they don't have control over the infrastructure. So there's no way that they can actually impact the quality of service in any shape or form, except in terms of what they do at their own end. There are multiple players in the internet ecosystem that impact the quality of service, right? So one is the ISP that you're on. Two is the application that you're using. Um, Three is how peering across the world is working, because if I'm messaging you, then it's going from me to my ISP to another ISP to another ISP to another ISP, and it can be multiple hops across the world before my message reaches you. So it's a number of variables that play over that, and no player will be able to ensure adequate quality of service over the internet uh, unless they have some sort of pairing arrangement with every stakeholder in that value chain. So, and even then, for example, if there's a disruption in the infrastructure, so let's say undersea cables in the Arabian Sea or the Bay of Bengal get impacted, which are two transit points for global internet traffic to come to India, then you can't be responsible for the quality of service as an online. So unfortunately, these kinds of arguments are being made with a myopic view that all this traffic remains in India, whereas it goes around the world. And so there is no mechanism. Secondly, what is the rationale for demanding that OTT services maintain a certain amount of quality of service? That is their business. These are their consumers. If their quality of service is not good enough, they'll switch to someone else, right? If WhatsApp today stops functioning properly, we might switch to Telegram, or we might switch to Signal, or we might find a fourth, fifth, sixth app to switch our communications to. It's because WhatsApp has very high quality of service that we remain with it. So internet is a marketplace with infinite competition. That's basically that competition forces players to increase the quality of service. Whereas when you look at telecom operators, there's not infinite competition. In India, it's virtually a duopoly, or maybe three players if you consider an almost defunct Vodafone idea, right? And so it's in order, because it's not a competitive marketplace, that you need to have quality of service requirements. The internet has got infinite competition.
Pondering over the rationale for asking for certain things, I come to another point. This is like the final question I had for you, which was one of the requirements that telcos have been asking for is that OTT platforms should allow porting of data from one platform to the other to give customers freedom of choice. What's your perspective on this?
I think that's something which the data protection bill had considered in terms of portability. And there's a very clear signal from the government of India in the sense that they have rejected the idea of portability. The data protection bill has no portability requirement. So, what has largely been determined in law by its exclusion, because portability was in the very first draft of the data protection bill that the Sri Krishna committee had put out. So, what is clearly a policy decision by the government to exclude portability, I don't understand why the TRAI can even go into this area, because it's also not in their jurisdiction. One can argue that online communication apps are actually not a part of the TRAI's jurisdiction. That's under MeitY, because that's on the internet.
Thank you, Nikhil. For those who may want to know more about this topic, we have extensive coverage on TRAI's consultation and the responses it received on our website.